Welcome to Everyday Martial Artist, a weekly podcast where you'll join me, Brian Doucette, as I interview a different martial artist each episode and hear their story. Some guests you may have heard of, and some you probably haven't. Be sure to subscribe where all your favorite podcasts are available. Also visit our website at everydaymartialartist.com. If you're listening for a specific interview, I sure hope you'll stay and check out the other episodes. A very special thank you to Topher Williams for our custom theme music. And now, the newest episode of Everyday Martial Artist. Everyday Martial Artist is brought to you by KOOnline.com for all your martial arts needs. Sparring and safety gear, rank belts, uniforms, weapons, patches, and more. Wholesale supplies made by martial artists for martial artists. Visit us today at ko-online.com. Hello and welcome to Everyday Martial Artist. I'm your host, Brian Doucette, and as we do every week, we're joined by a brand new guest talking about their life and their journey throughout the world of martial arts. My guest today has been involved in martial arts since 1967, has written and published 9 books on Kenpo, served as Ed Parker's representative in the Midwest for 11 years, and was on the board of examiners of the International Kenpo Karate Association. He was also the U.S. representative for Jeff Speakman's AKKS and was on the board for the WKKA and the Illinois state rep for the American Karate Association. He co-founded the Chinese Karate Federation in the 90s with Sean Kelley. Today he serves as a senior instructor of the Progressive Kenpo Systems Group and is also certified by the FAA as a flight instructor. Please welcome my guest today, Mr. Lee Wedlake. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm good, Brian. I appreciate you having me part of the project.
Hey, I appreciate your time. I know how busy people are, and anytime people are willing to give time for the podcast, I truly, truly appreciate it. What we like to do with all my guests, I want to go back to the very beginning. I know I mentioned you've been in it since 1967, but I want to know what led to that. Where did that first interest, that first spark about martial arts kind of come from for you?
I credit my martial art career to 3 women.
Okay.
One would be my mother. Another one would be one of my first judo instructors, and then my aunt. But it was my mother that got me started with a judo class at the YMCA. And that did not go very well, but she thought I really liked it. So one day I woke up, she had signed me up for judo lessons at a real school, which I went down there to visit with a lot of apprehension, being about 10 or 11 years old.
Okay.
And the instructor that I met there on that, when I took that first class, was a lady named Carol Wolken. And Carol said, "Show me what you're doing." I showed her what I had learned at the first judo class. She shook her head and said, "Not like that." And she showed me how to fall correctly, because the first class I'd been going home with headaches because the instructor really didn't pay attention to what we were doing.
Oh, wow.
He said, this is not fun. She fixed it, and I said, "Oh, this is fun." And it really hooked me. So I really give her a lot of credit for that.
Okay. And so back then, was that a little rare back then to have female instructors?
Well, this is the late 60s.
Okay.
And it was a judo school. Judo had been the art that got the most attention back then because it was a James Bond thing.
Okay.
And karate would come along a little bit later. Then you had the kung fu craze in the 70s. But in the judo world, yes, we had some female instructors, but just as today, there just weren't as many as men.
Right. Think about maybe those first handful of classes at that actual judo school. Once you got there and realized, yes, it was fun, what was it about it specifically that drew you in and made you want to keep going?
The classes were long classes. I mean, they lasted for 2 to 3 hours at times.
Wow.
And it was the old, I had to walk to school uphill both ways. I mean, judo school was miles away.
Yeah.
But my sensei's son and I were about the same age. So we got along great. And there were a lot of other young teenagers in that class. So between a kind of a relaxed instructional atmosphere and the physicality of it, my judo teacher back then, Joe Zorich, had been a power lifter. And so he taught us how to lift correctly. He taught us the importance of being in physical condition because strength helped. But this is back in the days when judo was fingertip judo, where it really relied more on technique. And it's changed over the years. A few years ago, I was teaching in Manchester, New Hampshire at Steve White's school with Jimmy Pedro, who's an Olympic gold medalist in judo.
Jimmy's been on the show.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, Jimmy and I, we've crossed paths several times. I said, "Hey, am I imagining things, but has this changed and that changed?" He said, "Oh, yeah. The technique has changed over the years, and it's become a little bit more power-oriented." So it was very interesting to see that, but really liked the judo attitude, because back then karate guys were just very ego-driven. I mean, a lot of them still are.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a relaxed attitude and with a great instructional format at the school. So I really, really enjoyed that.
Nice. And how long did you stay at that school?
I was there for probably 2 or 3 years until we moved out of the south side of Chicago and out to the suburbs, and I couldn't find a judo school.
Okay. So then what was next then after that?
Ran into some Kenpo guys at a party.
Really? Okay.
And they said, I said, well, I do this and we do that. And so they said, come on down to the studio sometime, which I did. And I said, well, this is pretty cool too. So that filled the bill for me and I got hooked on Kenpo.
Nice. And which instructor was that with?
The instructor was a man from California who had moved to Illinois.
Okay.
And opened 3 schools. I refused to mention his name because he was a bad guy.
Okay, no problem. Hey, I've been there, done that. I have a former instructor I will never mention on my show either. I anyone who asks, I just say he was my John Kreese from the Karate Kid. And they usually get what that means, so that's all that matters.
Well, it was funny because it turned out that John Sepulveda, if you know John.
I know the name. I have never talked to him, but I know him.
John and I are counterparts in the Kenpo world. It turns out we had studied with the same individual at different points in time, but he studied in California and I studied with him in Illinois.
Okay, cool. And how long did you remain with that person?
That would have been for about a little less than 3 years.
Okay.
And I had been going out in the tournament circuit, and then I ran into a man named Mike Sanders.
Ah, yes.
Who was in Sterling, Illinois, which was about 120 miles west of Chicago. And he had been a classmate of Gil Hibben.
Oh, yes, the knife guy.
Yeah, the knife guy.
Yep.
They studied together at Mills Crenshaw School in the Salt Lake City area. And Mills was one of Ed Parker's first black belts.
Mm-hmm. I met Mills years ago.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. I had met him a couple of times myself, but I got with Mike and I started training with him.
You mentioned tournaments. Now, first of all, to back up a little, did you ever get involved in tournaments when you were in judo?
No.
Okay. So what led you to the tournament, the competition side of Kenpo when you were involved in that?
Well, when I was in that first Kenpo school, they had an inter-school tournament.
Okay.
And I said, well, okay, sign me up. So I went and said, well, this is interesting and kind of fun. So that kind of got me started. And some of the guys in the studio were going to outside open circuit tournaments.
Mm-hmm.
I said, well, okay, well, I'll do that too. That got me hooked.
Nice. So do you remember your very first tournament then and how that went?
Yes. It was an open system tournament. And I think I was a purple belt at the time. The karate scene in the Midwest at that time was dominated by Japanese and Okinawan stylists.
Okay.
So hard style. So our forms were not very much appreciated by them. They just I don't think they knew what they were looking at.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember getting after sparring and not doing very well, but that's a motivator.
Yeah, definitely.
So that got me triggered.
So did you ever compete at the internationals?
Oh, yes. Competed every year at the internationals from 1977 until 1988.
Oh, wow. Very cool. That must have been fun. I've heard so many. I've been there once when I lived in California for a year, and I went to the internationals in '95 just to watch. But just the heyday, the 60s and 70s and 80s of that tournament must have been pretty wild.
It was very interesting.
Yeah.
We used to go every year. We took several of the guys from my studio. And some of the things you would see there is like, good Lord, what are they doing here? But it was good to get out there and compete on such a big scale.
Yeah.
I tell people today that when I competed back then, you go into the men's black belt Kenpo forms division and there would be 60 of us in there.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a big deal. So when you placed or won, it's like that was a big deal.
Yeah. Wow. That's crazy. That's I've heard that too. And on the fighting side, I've heard even more in the black belt division. Jeez. I mean, I go to tournaments nowadays and, there's like 7-8 guys.
No, it was not unusual for it to run well into the morning, like 1 o'clock in the morning or so, because there were so many in multiple rings of the same weight division.
Wow.
Yeah, It was really something.
So I've been to a few tournaments in my years that went past midnight, but that was usually because they weren't being run properly, not because there was too many people.
Well, I think the IKC was kind of a combination of those factors.
Okay. That's kind of cool. Wow. And you mentioned your school and stuff. Now, at what belt level and kind of what drew you to the teaching side of martial arts?
Well, when I was a kid, and you go, what do you want to be when you grow up? I said, well, I'd like to be a teacher.
Oh.
Thought I would go on and be a school teacher of some sort. And as the years went by and I got hooked on the martial arts, I said, I'd really like to be a martial arts instructor. So this is something that I'm thinking about in my high school days.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the opportunity to start teaching at some local recreation centers over time, and that just grew into a school. I had so many people that were taking lessons in my basement or over at the rec centers that I wanted to give them a home. So my aunt, who I mentioned earlier, loaned me $1,500 back in 1976.
Wow.
I mean, you can't do that today.
Yeah.
But she wanted to be a partner at first. And then when I got it going, she said to me, you don't want a partner. She says, I'm just loaning you the money, just pay me back, which I did. Mm-hmm. I opened that first school in June of 1976 and had schools in 2 states over time until I finally said, I'm out of the karate business back in 2007 as far as a commercial school.
Okay. That very first school, how long did that specific one stay open in that location?
I was kind of like a gypsy. I moved from place to place because I was getting bigger.
Okay.
But that was 13 years.
So do you remember at your height, like the most students you had in one school?
125 in a Chicago school, 250 in Florida.
Wow. So what led you to Florida? I mean, that's quite, a lot of times you hear people in multiple schools, they're like neighboring states. What led you to open one in Florida?
Well, I had left the club in Chicago to one of my black belts who has handed it off just recently, but he took the reins. His name was Kurt Barnhart, and he kept it alive. So that club is actually still functioning.
Wow, very cool.
A lot of the black belts I had back then that knew Ed Parker are still coming in for seminars and coming in for lessons and so on.
Okay.
But when the karate business got pretty rough in the late 80s, there was a point in time where about 25% of schools in the United States went out of business. Ooh. I was working as a flight instructor.
Okay.
And then I had gotten a job offer to fly as a charter pilot up in New England.
Okay.
So I moved to New England. And when I got there, the owner of the operation says to me, I talked to my accountant. I can't pay you.
Okay.
So I moved all the way to New England and I found out I wasn't going to get paid.
Dang.
Stuck around there for just a few months, and I said, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. So I had a couple of sisters, and my mom and dad had moved down to Florida. So I went down there, and Florida wouldn't have been my first choice, but I was getting kind of low on options. So I got down there, got myself set up, opened another school in Fort Myers in 1992.
Did you ever consider opening one in New England when you were out there and didn't have the job?
No, because he's one of my senior students today, Steve White had a school. I didn't want to step on his toes.
That makes sense.
So I said Florida, and I don't like the cold.
Me either. I'm in Minnesota. Trust me, I feel you.
Yeah.
And how long did that Fort Myers school stay open?
Until I sold it in 2007.
So is it still going then with whoever bought it, or?
No, he blew it.
That's too bad.
Running a karate school is not easy.
Oh yeah, no, I know that. I have a lot of friends who've run schools over the years. So
yeah.
So think back to maybe one of those very first classes when you were helping teach to now. What do you think over the years has changed the most about your teaching styles?
That's a really good question, Brian. Back in the day, you used to be able to teach with a stick in your hand.
Yep.
The demographic was like 18 to 24-year-old males. Not a lot of kids at all. Not very many women. The one or two that were in the school that I was first at, she was a tough one. She actually wore a cup.
Oh, wow.
I had met when I was teaching in Sweden back in the late 90s. A lot of those ladies over there would do the same thing because they like to hit. Mm-hmm. So the teaching was a lot of monkey see, monkey do, which unfortunately affects a lot of the martial arts, is because these are teachers that don't have instruction in teaching. There is a reason that people go to school, they go to college to get a teaching degree, because there's a lot to it. And what happens in a lot of karate schools is like you learn as you watch your teacher, and then maybe you get some coaching, and sometimes you don't get much coaching at all, and they throw you out there and they tell you to go teach that class.
Yeah.
It's gotten a lot better, but back then it was still kind of rough. It was back on the what we call the dungeon dojo days, where a lot of hard contact, not much in the way of safety gear. And at least in the school I was at, it was a trickle down where the orange belts would teach the white belts and the purples would teach the oranges and so on.
Okay.
So not much to it.
Yeah, definitely. It's always fun hearing that answer to that question, because I know just talking to my own instructor from when he started in 1978 and how different it was in the 80s, and even thinking back to when I was a teenager in early 20s in the 90s, how different it is just to today from the 90s. It's just the style of teaching, and heard the stories of my instructor's instructor back in 1978. If a kid didn't listen in class, he gets smacked across the head. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Can't do that now.
No, you can't.
Now, did you attain black belt in judo also?
No, I made it to brown.
Okay. Talk a little bit about your Kenpo black belt test, your first one. What was that like?
I actually failed my test the first time.
Okay.
I was pretty good at the forms. In fact, that's what my reputation generally is. Oh, he's a forms guy. Mm-hmm. But I did forms and fighting and all that. But the self-defense, the way I was taught it in an offshoot system of Kenpo, was not very good. So when it came to the self-defense test, it was bad. So I failed it. But I knew, to their credit, they said, this is what you need to work on. Because this test I took was not at the studio. It was an all-style board. And they said, this is what you need to do. And so I took that to heart, and I worked the heck out of it until I went back and tested again and passed the second time.
With Kenpo, is there like minimum how long you have to wait to retest?
No.
Okay.
Nope.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Because I know my Taekwondo black belt test, I when I failed the first time, I think I had to wait either 30 or 60 days before I could retest, if I'm not mistaken. Mm. So, and I've heard other styles that will make you wait 6 months. And one guest, there was a year if you didn't pass. I'm like, wow, that almost seems too long.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned like teaching in Sweden. So what are some other countries you've taught in over the years, and maybe one or two favorites?
Well, I really liked teaching in Sweden.
Okay. Sweden
felt a lot like home to me, and being that you're from Minnesota, a lot of Swedes, a lot of Scandinavians,
definitely,
up there, your territory. I just felt very much at home, and it was kind of strange because I spent so much time over there. They started teaching me the language, and the language actually stuck. And they said it's kind of unusual that you would pick it up that fast and remember it. But I like Sweden. I taught in Australia.
Oh, wow.
Ireland, England, Denmark, Northern Ireland, Germany, Austria.
You ever teach in Italy?
No.
Okay.
In Italy, didn't get to teach over there.
Okay.
Taught in the Channel Islands, which is actually part of the UK.
Okay.
Yeah, so I got around a little bit.
That's kind of cool. I've never traveled much internationally, but Australia and Italy are on my bucket list. Those are two places I want to get to visit.
Yeah.
So what led to the book writing for you? That very first book, how did that come about?
When I was with Mr. Parker, when I was in high school, I wrote for the school newspaper, so the bug was always there. My mother fancied herself to be a writer as well. So that kind of trickled down to me. And when I got with him, I had started writing what I knew, because my first real Kenpo instructor, Michael Sanders, was writing as well.
Okay.
So I looked at that and I said, there's an appeal to this. So I started to write, and working with Mr. Parker, I would write these notes and show them to him. And then I was with him for several years until I wrote something on how to judge Kenpo forms and submitted it to Inside Kung Fu magazine back in 1982 or 83, and they published it.
Nice.
And that became the first of the string of articles that kind of established me as something of an authority on the art. But every time that I wrote something, I always gave it to Mr. Parker to look at.
Okay.
And he gave his stamp of approval. And it wasn't always on the first go. Mm-hmm. So, in fact, one time he looked at it, he says, well, you got the skeleton of the idea, but you're missing some bones.
Nice.
But it was an opportunity because these were all points at which we could start a discussion. And I learned an awful lot from it because, he had a requirement that you wrote a thesis when you went for black.
I've heard that. Yeah, that's cool.
Yes. He always looked at it as being like a college level education. So he wanted you to write a thesis and create a thesis form for first degree black belt. Well, I wrote these series of articles. Then I talked with the people over at Unique Publications, which is out of business, but they had a large martial art library that they sold. And they said, yeah, we'd love to publish your book, but it's going to take 2 years.
Wow.
And that was 1988 or so. And I got impatient. I said, give me that thing. And I said, I'll do something with this. Well, it wouldn't be till about 10 years later that I took everything and consolidated it and published my first book called Kenpo Karate 101.
Okay.
And that started the number series. Then I compiled the articles into a book called Further Insights into Kenpo.
Nice.
And then I wrote Kenpo 201, 301, 401, 501, and 601. And then I capped that off with a book called Lessons with Ed Parker, which was a description of the interactions that I had with him, private lessons and seminars, and in traveling with him, being part of his team to go overseas.
Okay.
And I'm working on an update of that. Should be out in spring of 2024.
Cool. I've read the original, so I'll have to look for that update. That's cool.
Yeah. Well, I had to update it, and I added about 40 pages of information to it.
Nice.
And then I also wrote the Kenpo Karate Compendium, which was a compilation of the number books, the 101 through 601. So it was the forms and with more information and new pictures and so on. And then last year I published the Kenpo Companion, which is about 500 pages.
Wow.
So that brings my work in Kenpo up to about 10 books, and I did 3 fiction books with a writer in England named Phil Buck.
Really? Talk a little bit about that. That's cool.
Well, Phil's a Kenpo black belt, and he's also got black belts in other systems. He's a Kung Fu guy, and he's got an Aikido black belt and so on. But Phil got his black in Kenpo from Gary Ellis in Plymouth, England. And I've known Gary since 1986, I think.
Okay.
So Phil would kind of follow me around, and when I was teaching in Germany, he'd fly over and spend the weekend. And we get to talking about writing because he's a very successful writer over there. He's asked to speak in universities, and they've got an award named after him. He writes horror, and it's pretty scary stuff. It makes me wonder about his sanity sometimes. Anyway, Phil says, I think you've got a fiction book, and I know you can do this. I don't think so. And he provoked me. So I said, I don't think so. He says, how about if we write it together? I said, yeah, we'll do that. And so we wrote the first one, and that turned out pretty well. So we wrote a second and a third, and we've got some flash fiction coming out at the end of January.
That's cool.
That'll post it on Facebook.
I'll have to look the fiction ones up. That's, my daughter wants to be a writer. And so every time I find interesting books like that, I try to point them in her direction and see what she thinks. So.
Hemingway said, being a writer was easy. All you do is sit at a typewriter and bleed.
Nice. That's good. That's really good. Kind of mentioned him a few times, but just talk a little bit about Mr. Parker. Kind of what was he like, and what was he like to train with? I've been lucky enough to interview a handful of people that trained with him over the years, and it's I always love hearing those stories.
Well, he was intimidating for one, and being the father of American karate. And he's always said, he says, I didn't take that title. He says, that was hung on me by a magazine, which it was.
Yep.
But I met him. I went to the Internationals in 1977. I have a picture in one of my books of that very first photograph. And then I would run into him across the United States during national tournaments. I was on the national tournament circuit. And I kept seeing him. And of course, he was seeing me. And we'd get to talk a little bit until 1979 at a tournament in Ohio. He says, I'd like to talk to you afterwards. And he says to me that he'd like me to come to California to train and wants me to be his representative in the Midwest.
Wow.
So I was astonished. I had lost my previous instructor to a motorcycle accident. That was Mike Sanders.
Oh, wow.
So I didn't know what to do, where to go. So here it was. It just falls in my lap by the grace of God. And I get with him, and my first lesson is on the mat at Pasadena. It's a private lesson on like a Monday morning. And so I'm a hotshot second-degree black belt with a bunch of trophies that I've won in tournaments, and I don't know anything. So he starts to fill me in. He says, down on your horse, how do you find the dimensions of a horse? What about an inward block? And I was like, oh, my God, I didn't know any of this. So the depth of knowledge was really extremely beneficial to me.
Okay.
And he's a big, powerful man. He was fast. And when he turned it on, it was scary. But all the times that he worked on me, he never hurt me. He hit me. He'd knock the wind out of me now and again. And I remember once he caught me with an elbow in the solar plexus. And I was, oh! He says, yeah, it kind of goes up and down your spine across your kidneys, doesn't it? And he laughed at me. But he was always, with me, he was always encouraging. And I was doing a demo in Australia. And I was down there on the team with him. I was running Form 5, and he was standing behind me. I could hear him saying, go, Lee, go, go, go. And that sort of stuff meant a lot.
That's cool.
He was, he had my back. So being with him, he was one of the guys, but you knew that there was something about him. He had charisma. He would have been part of the royal family if the royal line still existed in Hawaii. Mm-hmm. It actually does, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And he would make people feel like they were special. So he had a princely quality to him. And I learned an awful lot from him, not only martial arts wise, but how to deal with people and handling karate politics and running a business and so on. So when I wrote my book about him, I wanted people to get a sense of what he was like, not just what he did,
right,
but what the man was like, his family. He had a dog, and what kind of car he drove and that sort of thing. And he liked to tell jokes. I would pick him up at the airport and we would tell jokes to and from.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So it was fun to be with him.
That's cool. I've always loved Mr. Parker stories. I mean, when I lived in California, 96, 97, and I trained. So I did some training with Larry Tatum, with Jeff Speakman, and with Jim and Deanna Diggs. And I would be students popping in, older students that trained with him. And they'd always, take time after class to tell an Ed Parker story. And it was just, that's so cool. So it's always good hearing it, firsthand from people who were there and who knew him. I mean, like I said, I never got that. I mean, I was born in 74. I didn't start Kenpo till 96 when I lived in California. I trained other styles, but never even would have had a chance to meet him. So that's cool. That's really cool that you got to have that experience and have that be part of your life.
Oh, it was great. I can't tell you how many times we'd, have lunch or dinner somewhere, and there'd be people at the table with us like Ernie Reyes or Remy Prasis.
Nice.
Billy Blanks and so on. Chuck Norris.
Very cool. So talk a little bit about, I know we had chatted before we started recording that you were part of the Tom Bleecker series, The Journey. Talk a little bit about that when you were approached and kind of what your initial thoughts were on that. That's how I first learned about Tom Bleecker, when I bought that book, and Tom was actually the very first guest on my podcast, episode number 1. Yeah, really good interview. I love the books, and just kind of talk a little bit about that.
Well, I was, I don't know what the process was to get your name out there and, get nominated to be included in the book. But I get contacted by Tom, and he says, well, we're going to include you in this. And much like what you're doing, it's like, well, tell us about your background. Mm-hmm. So it was written, and I sent it out to Tom, and he wrote back. And then he called me, and he had a series of questions. And the one that really stuck out was that he said, would you call yourself an autodidact? And I went, what's that? He said, it's a person who teaches themselves. Ah. And I said, yes, I would have to say that, because I was in a situation with martial arts wise where I didn't have an instructor where I could go down to the school a couple of times a week. It turned out that after that first guy, who was a bad guy, and I got with Mike Sanders, I had to drive. I had to spend a couple of hours to get out there and hours home. And then I lose Mike in a motorcycle accident. And now I found myself getting on an airplane to fly to Los Angeles to take lessons. Mm-hmm. So you can't expect under those conditions to get fed the material like you would if you were in class twice a week.
Right.
So you've got to have one of my students called a fertile, prepared mind. I did a lot of reading, not just on Kenpo, because there wasn't much to read back then, but just the martial arts in general. So I had some idea of the type of questions to ask with him. So that's what I think contributed to Tom's question about being an autodidact. And I've found that that's to be true in some of the other things that I've done in my life, like aviation and law enforcement and so on.
That's cool. Talk about KenpoTV.com, kind of what led to that, and tell, what can people see on there?
That's a really good question, too. I had a student who's an IT guy and very enthusiastic. His name is Tom Finelli. Tom said, you have to put this stuff on film and put it up on a web so people can access it 24/7. And I said, I don't know about that. And he urged me, so I did it. And what I've got now is, it started as KenpoTV as a website, and then we moved all the videos over to Vimeo.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go to Vimeo, I've got 2 tiers of instructional video on there, and there's approximately 2,000 videos that I filmed. And the lower tier is for beginner and intermediate students. The upper tier is for advanced and skilled and instructors. So as I was talking about earlier, about a lot of instructors don't have formal instructing in instructing. I've put a series of about 75 videos up there about the laws of learning, how people learn and how they forget, and tactics to approach certain issues that you have as you're teaching somebody. Well, I got a person who's this, or I got a person who can't do that. What should I do? What can I do? So I do that, and there's about 100 free videos.
Oh, wow.
Up there on the homepage that, stuff like there's Professor Chow doing a demo and Parker teaching and that sort of thing. But the Vimeo platform itself has got sections on, these are the basics, these are the forms, these are the self-defense techniques, here's the extensions, here's the freestyles, here's the concepts and principles, here's terminology, and so on.
Yeah, I'm just kind of looking over it right now. A lot of good stuff on there. Wow. And I will definitely put links for all this stuff when the episode comes out too.
Yeah, great.
A lot of good info.
Yeah. I mean, it's got a good response from people. They can use it 24/7, and if they don't want to subscribe to it, they can rent a video for 24 hours for $2.
Nice. That's kind of cool. Nice to have that option.
Sure.
So, and then you also talked a little bit about, and not much to do with martial arts, but being a flight instructor. So what about your martial arts training do you think helped in that part of your life?
Well, that's a really good question, too. And it's funny because in the Parker system, we have this mandala called the universal pattern,
mm-hmm.
which is a one-dimensional representation of three-dimensional space. And when you fly airplanes or helicopters, when you fly, you're working in 3 dimensions. And I took some of the ideas that I had learned from the universal pattern and applied that to how I saw the airplane moving and those dimensional changes. And really, if you learn martial arts, like boxing is a good example, really you have 4 punches: jab, cross, hook, and uppercut. In aviation, you've really only got 4 things you can do with an airplane.
Mm-hmm.
So you put these things together into combinations, and in an airplane, that's how you turn your stuff into traffic patterns and aerobatics, that sort of thing. It's just the basics tied together in different sequences. And then Ed Parker's concept of margin for error was pretty handy for me because, you're dealing with a dynamic situation, landing an airplane or taking off. You got a pretty stiff crosswind or there's ice on a runway. It's like, how do you plan for that? What's your margin for error? Because you can't do the ideal phase anymore. And when they say that learning martial arts is, also learning life lessons, that's how I view that sort of thing. It's like, I learned it doing Kenpo, but I applied it in other parts of my life.
I like that. That's a good answer. Now you've been in, judo, and you've done Kenpo most of your life. So what are your thoughts on something like MMA and the UFC? And is that something you're a fan of?
I don't watch it.
Okay.
I watch it. It first started, and I have to laugh at the comment somewhere says, well, it was all MMA in the beginning, and then it got specialized. So,
that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, I kind of think so. And it's good. It's another option for people, and some people like to get out there and do MMA, the nice blend.
Mm-hmm.
And I am certainly not opposed to taking things from other arts and integrating it. In fact, I've got a student named Eddie Cabrera in Tampa who's a Golden Gloves winner.
Nice.
And he does all the Kenpo fusion, and he puts boxing into the Kenpo techniques.
Okay.
And Phil Buck in England has built a program for us called the Locksmith, which is a locking program to fit in with the self-defense techniques. And I've taught internal arts to some of my guys, so they like to put the internal aspects in with the Kenpo as well.
Yeah, a lot of the people I've talked to that knew Mr. Parker and trained with Mr. Parker said he was always about the art evolving. He didn't want it to stay the same. And it seems a lot of people lost that, I think.
Well, you got 2 camps, just like anything else.
Yeah.
I opened up a seminar once many years ago. I said, the first thing I'd like to say is that nobody agrees about anything.
That is true.
And everybody laughed. You have the people that are doing their art like they did back in 1980. They're just running the techniques over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
They're not doing the exploration of the what ifs and formulation and so on. And that's okay, if that's what they want to do. But I think you're right. But I'm seeing a lot of the same issues that I saw in traveling with him back in the 80s. People are still doing it today. It's like, have we learned anything, guys?
So in all your years of martial arts, is there one philosophy you've learned that is at the top of your list?
Well, there would be two.
Okay.
One is don't fight unless you absolutely have to.
Nice.
Because when I ask people, it's like, if you get into an altercation, and a physical altercation, what are the percentages that you're going to win? And most people say, well, it's 50-50, you win or lose. It's not really. It's 33%, 33.3%, because you can win, lose, or draw.
Mm-hmm.
There's always a possibility that guy or person gets a lucky shot and it kills you or maims you. So if you don't have to, if you can swallow the testosterone and walk away, that's a better thing. That's one. The other one is that there are certain golden threads that run through the martial arts, and it doesn't matter what system you do, that there are certain principles that everybody follows. And I thought that was valuable as well.
Nice. All right, so I got a few fun questions to wrap it up. Now, this one, it doesn't have to be 4. I've had people give as few as 2 names and as many as 8, so it's kind of up to you, but maybe 3, 4, 5 names that you would put on your personal Mount Rushmore of martial arts.
Oh, boy. Well, I would put Ed Parker up there.
Definitely.
For a lot of reasons, and not just because he was my teacher for 11 years. But if you look at the constellation of stars in the martial arts, he would have to be one of them.
Yeah.
I would put Jigoro Kano.
Nice.
The founder of Judo, because of what he did as far as doing an extraction, taking the breaking and so on out of the art to make it something that people could do of all ages. And even though it's called the gentle way, it's really not so gentle.
That is true.
And one other name I always like to mention because he's a role model for me. That's Danny Inosanto.
Yes. Awesome.
And I've run into Danny many, many times in my career and talked with him and keep in touch with a couple of his guys over at the academy there. But he's got such a great attitude, and he's getting older and he's still out there doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I'd have to say Danny's on that list.
Have you ever got to train with Danny?
Oh, yes.
Nice. I never got to, though. I tried stopping by when I lived in California, like 2 times I tried stopping by his school and he wasn't there. So I never actually got to meet him myself. Still, I've got to meet many cool people over the years. Just never got to meet Mr. Inosanto. I've interviewed Diana. Diana was on the show, but Dan would be fun to sit down and have a conversation with sometime too. So
he absolutely would be, because we've had many conversations, not extensive ones, but it was funny the one time. I asked him a little bit about his background with Ed Parker because he was a Kenpo black belt.
Mm-hmm.
He says, he says, Ed lectures me.
Nice.
I just thought that was funny.
I think a lot of people forget he was a Kenpo black belt just because he's so known for Kali and Eskrima, and he's so known for Jeet Kune Do. A lot of people forget he was, a Kenpo black belt.
I remember reading years and years ago, out of the 13 Jeet Kune Do instructors, 7 or 8 of them were Kenpo black belts.
Wow. I did not realize that. That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Nice.
Larry Hartzell and Danny Inosanto and so many other guys.
Okay. All right. Do you have, you can't pick one of yours, obviously, but do you have a favorite martial arts book?
Boy, I got a lot of them. I would think, and it's more on the concept side, but On Combat is a good book for any martial artist.
I don't think I've heard of that one. I'm adding that one to my list.
He wrote 2 of them. It's Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman. He wrote On Combat and On Killing.
Okay.
And you want an insight into the mind, the mental aspects of those things. And those are 2 great books to read. And then Shepard's 2 books, The Fighter's Mind and The Fighter's Heart.
Those are good. Yeah, those are really good.
Those are good books.
Do you have another book planned?
I'm working on the update to Lessons with Ed Parker, the 2024 version. But beyond that, I don't know. I mean, every time somebody asks me this question, Brian, I said, no, I'm not going to do another one. And then I do another one. So
7 books later, I'm not going to do another one.
Right.
I get that. Yeah. I've thought about it over the years, and I'm just like, man, I mean, I love writing, And I was a kid who we had to write a 10-page paper in high school, and I turned in a 70-page paper. But the thought of sitting down and writing a book, I don't know.
Well, it's like anything else. And people ask me all the time because everybody wants to write a book. In fact, the first book that I was putting together, I talked to a lady who was a mother of one of my students. She had published a couple of books, and I said, I want to write a book. And she laughed at me. She goes, everybody likes to write a book. No, seriously. And I showed her the draft. She goes, oh, okay, well, maybe you're serious. But, I talk to people. It's like, put your thoughts down and spend maybe 20 minutes a day working on it. That's what Thomas Jefferson did.
Okay.
If you read about Thomas Jefferson, about what polymath he was, an inventor, a musician, a politician, he wrote the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah.
How does a person do that? Well, he said that he took 20 minutes a day and worked on different subjects. And, he spoke multiple languages, and that's how you do that. And then you actually start to put it together over time. Because I think it's when you start to push yourself that you actually burn yourself out a little bit and you never get it done.
That's good advice.
And then when you do get something written, I advise authors, I said, you give it to somebody who knows about as much of the subject as you. Give it to somebody who knows nothing and somebody who knows more.
Okay.
And have them read it and get their comments. Because when I wrote my Lessons with Ed Parker book, I gave it to my wife. And she said, what about this? And did he have that? And I said, those are really good questions. And I got the answers and I included them in the book.
Okay.
She knew nothing about him. She never met him.
Right. Yeah.
But I thought those things are helpful. So when I give them to somebody, I had a book translated into German. And she came back and said, what about this and what about that? And that taught me the value of having to be very explicit. Mm-hmm. Because we default to slang and we assume that people know, well, you know what I'm talking about.
True.
Do you mean this or do you mean that? So that helped me improve my writing.
And the good thing about the time we're in now is probably the easiest time of any time in history it is if someone wants to actually write and publish a book. Because, I suppose when you probably did your first one, there was probably maybe 10 publishers, 15 publishers in the U.S. that would maybe consider it. And now you can go through something like an Amazon. You can self-publish. There's so many different ways you can publish now compared to before and actually get a book out and make it a bestseller possibly without having to go through one of the big ones. All right. Now, this one you may not have an answer for, usually about 50-50 with my guests. Do you have a favorite martial arts video game? Did you ever get into video games?
No.
Okay. That was easy. All right. How about a favorite martial arts TV show? No? Nothing. No. Just don't watch them or just none that you were a fan of?
I don't watch karate movies.
Really?
When I was younger, when I was first getting into it, I'm a teenager. I think it was a Brown Belt or something. The first movie to come to the United States is called Five Fingers of Death.
Yes.
And so we went and hooted and hollered and all that. And then, you saw Enter the Dragon, all the Bruce Lee movies came out. And then you had the Karate Kid. Mr. Parker loved the Karate Kid. Yeah. The first one. He loved it.
Yep.
And I knew Fumio Demura as well.
Yep. Another former guest on my show.
Yep. He was a cool guy.
Yes.
He rose in Chicago once. And he doubled for Mr. Miyagi. Mm-hmm. But I really kind of lost interest in it. But I can certainly appreciate, I watched the John Wick movies.
Yeah.
I said, I like what he's doing.
Nice. Well, then you may not have an answer for this one then. I was going to ask you a favorite martial arts movie. Is there one from maybe when you were younger that still stands out where maybe if it was on and you were flipping around channels and saw it, you'd probably sit and watch it?
There's a couple of movies that if Jan walks through and sees them on TV, she goes, okay, he's gone. Like Braveheart.
Nice.
Or The Last Samurai.
I love that movie. Yeah.
So I don't know if you call those martial art movies.
I think Last Samurai I would count. That's actually been picked a few times.
Yeah, I just, when I first heard that, and Tom Cruise, I say, I'm not going to see that. And then somebody got me to go see it, and I took several of my black belts with me. And the one black belt, Frank Triolo, had lived in Japan when he flew for Japan Airlines. And at the end of the movie, I heard something. I looked over at Frank, and Frank's older than I am, crying.
Wow.
What's up, Frank? And he says, it just makes me know how much I miss the people of Japan.
Wow.
It just made him so emotional. So I thought that was a pretty powerful movie.
That's cool. So what did you think of Karate Kid? You said Mr. Parker liked it. Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, I liked it. I didn't like the second one.
Yeah.
Which was...
The first one is the one that got me into martial arts. So that's the whole reason I started martial arts in 1984, because I was walking out of the movie theater and a local Tang Soo Do school was handing out free passes. Good marketing in 1984, that's for sure.
Yeah. He loved that movie. He thought it was great.
I watch it at least once a year. It's one of my all-time favorites.
Yeah.
All right, well, this one, maybe you'll have an answer for them. This one doesn't have to be a martial arts movie. Any movie you've ever seen, favorite movie fight scene?
Favorite movie fight scene? Mm-hmm. I'm going to default back to The Last Samurai.
Okay.
When the ninjas attack the village.
Oh, yeah, that's a great scene.
Because, there's all that sword play, but at the very end, when there are two of them with Cruz and I don't remember the character's name,
mm-hmm.
the clan leader, they were standing there. It was quiet, and their eyes were bugging out. They're on high alert. I say, that is what it's like.
That's cool. Yeah, that's a great movie. So now I've heard rumors for years and different people and stuff. And do you think we'll ever see a movie about Mr. Parker, biography movie about his life?
I don't think so. I know that they've said that they were trying to pull one together,
mm-hmm.
but no, I don't think so.
That's too bad. I just think that's a story people would enjoy. I know. I mean, not just martial artists. I mean, I think people would love to see that movie. I'm still holding out hope that maybe in my lifetime I'll see it.
Mm-hmm. Did you ask Tom Bleeker that question?
I'm pretty sure I did. I'd have to talk because I wouldn't be surprised if he wrote the screenplay probably. So, yeah, I'll have to reach out. I mean, that was 3 years ago when I interviewed him, 3.5 years ago. So I'll have to reach out to him. I've also had Ed Parker Jr. on the show too. So yeah, actually, Mr. Parker Jr. actually designed the logo for my podcast.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, such an amazing artist, and I'm hoping to have him do one of the portraits one of these days. He's such a talent. I love everyone he's ever done. So
Yep.
Well, before I let you go, is there anything that maybe I forgot to ask you, or you just want to be sure to get mentioned before we wrap it up?
I don't think so. I've spent all these years teaching and wanting to perpetuate the art. It's got a lot of value to it in a lot of ways that we've talked about. So I've written the books and done the videos and all that. I have to laugh when people say, well, you wrote the books. I said, I didn't write them for you. I wrote them for me because I forget things. But I want that information out there because over the years, people were hesitant. They didn't want to write it. They just said, well, I can't. I'm not a writer. That's why they have ghostwriters.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to be preserved. And we've got such great technology now that we didn't have, like you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And everything from many, many years ago is like it was cave drawings and it was passed down by word of mouth and so on. You have the historical aspects. Yeah, I think people really need to take advantage of the resources. And I've seen people out there that said, well, we just don't know where to get it. There's a lot of seniors out there, a lot of senior instructors that you can get a hold of to get it, from first generation people.
Yeah.
And they're not going to be around a whole lot longer.
Right.
Instead of saying, well, I don't know, I can't find it. Oh, it's out there. And it's easier to get than it ever was.
And that's one of the main reasons I started this podcast too, is that, I want these stories to be told. And I've had 3 former guests now pass away since I've interviewed them. And, one of them, I was their last interview before they passed away. And it's like, that hits hard. I'm like, that's the last time they got to tell their story. Yeah. That's why I love when people say yes to this and agree to do it, I don't take it for granted. I think it's important that, and I have many non-martial artists that listen to my show and they just, I love good storytelling and these people have interesting lives. And I purposely, when I started it, I didn't want just people known for martial arts. I wanted a wide range of guests. I have people who I've had NFL Hall of Famers and, people from movies and TV shows that weren't known for martial arts, but I found out that they trained in martial arts and, things like that. So I wanted a nice wide range of guests and just for a chance to them to be able to tell their story in their own words and let people make their own decisions on it.
Sure.
Well, I truly appreciate your time, sir. This has been such a blast. I've known about you for a while. Like I said, I've read the Tom Bleeker books, and even though I don't train in Kenpo anymore because I don't really have a local school, but I've always been a fan of Kenpo and followed the Kenpo community. So I've always known about you, and you were on my list for a while as someone I wanted to reach out to and try to get an interview with. So I'm glad we made this happen. Yeah,
well, I'm glad you asked. It's always fun to do these sort of things, and you asked me a couple of questions I haven't been asked before, so it was cool.
That's always good. I like doing that. Well, I can't wait till the episode comes out.
Yep, me too.
Thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist. We hope you will join us every week for a brand new episode with a different martial artist telling their story. If you enjoy the show, be sure to leave us a review. Also, be sure to check out our website at everydaymartialartist.com. There you can find all of our episodes and contact us to suggest guests and ask questions. Again, thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist, and we'll see you next week.